listening to the Ag Policy Connection, brought to you by RealAgriculture in partnership with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. We're connecting the dots between the people and the policies that shape agriculture and farming today and into the future.
Welcome to the Ag Policy Connection podcast. I'm your host, Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. In today's episode, we dive into a critical conversation on Canadian agri-food in a sustainable world, exploring how Canada's agri-food sector can lead on sustainability while navigating the evolving landscape of ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance standards. This episode is part of day 2 wrap-up of this series from a big meeting that happened, hosted by Cappy, in Ottawa last month. Joining us are 3 outstanding guests who each bring a unique perspective to today's discussion. First, we have Isabelle Mégré. She is director at the Montreal office of the IFRS Foundation. Isabelle will help us understand the impending ESG standards and why they matter for the Canadian agri-food sector. Next, we'll talk to Mike Mikulak from Food and Beverage Manitoba. He joins to share some insights on how the National Agri-Food Performance Index could support industry partners in meeting these ESG reporting demands. And finally, we have Drevet, the Executive Director at the Centre for Agri-Food Benchmarking, who will guide us through the solutions the index offers to benchmark sustainability and improve transparency across Canada's agri-food system. Today's discussion centers around key questions. What does it mean to consider sustainability as a continuum? Why is ESG reporting now a focal point for the agri-food industry? And how does Canada's unique approach to sustainability set it apart on the global stage? Join us as we explore these questions and more, examining how the National Agri-Food Performance Index supports Canadian businesses in demonstrating their commitment to sustainability. Let's dive in with our guests. So, Tara, at day 2 of the meeting in Ottawa, there was a lot of talk about sustainability being this continuum. Okay. Rather than this absolute term. And so what does that actually mean? How do we what do you mean it's a continuum?
Yeah, it's interesting. That came up and really resonated with a lot of the participants at the conference. I think what we're looking at is that it's always changing. Our approach to doing business and making decisions now is impacted by so many dynamic factors, weather patterns, supply chains, market access, consumer demand, and we're moving towards a more and more digital information ecosystem. We're talking a lot about digital ag and ag tech, what can be done with a database to support holistic management decisions. So I think it really makes sense to now talk about sustainability as a continuum.
Now, I guess, give me a little bit here of the why. Like, why is this whole focus in the benchmarking, being able to apply the numbers? Because, I attended part of day 2, and it was pretty heavy, for somebody that's not in this on a daily basis. Like, you're living and breathing this all the time. So give us some background for our audience in terms of the why of these sorts of initiatives.
Yeah. So one of the big whys, we have an external pressure on us, right, to respond to ESG requirements and reporting. And that's quite a messy landscape, whether we're talking, depending on which international market we're looking at, whether it's Europe, the US, we can think about the GRI. There's a number of different indices and standards out there. And Canada is upping its game in terms of really bringing this into practice and seeing what reporting is going to look like in our financial institutions and across our supply chains. Yep. So part of this is influenced by external factors. And then I think there's a great opportunity, too, to create alignment within the sector across a very diverse array of participants in terms of what our key issues are and how we're talking about things. Aligning on those material topics is important, and facilitating decision-making at a sector level.
And Isabelle, I can imagine the difficulty here, or the challenges of having ESG reporting and standards that, as Tara said, align domestically across different industries, but also with other countries around the world. Like the complexity here of this it feels very high, or am I not seeing the forest through the trees?
No, it is a challenge, and this was the impulsion behind the creation of the International Sustainability Standards Board. It's really to find this common global baseline across industries, across countries. So the goal is really to answer to the needs of investors and financial markets to make sure that we have these proper information to make sure that the financial markets work properly and are adapted to the new realities. The economy has evolved and the world has evolved, so it needs to be reflected as well in the financial statements. And so what we're trying to achieve is really to build this global baseline. And so in our standards, it's not only a one size fits all. It needs a lot of interpretation by the different companies who are using our standards. And this is where we hope that this is going to help also the different companies to prepare so that instead of having this wide array of standards or frameworks, then everyone can report to the same global baseline, making it things easier a little bit for companies instead of having different requirements for different companies or different investors, different stakeholders. So really the goal is to harmonize these different elements. And we have a global team working on these issues, and they're experts in the field. So hopefully we've gotten some momentum at the moment over the past couple of years. And the momentum is in Canada. The Canadian Sustainability Standards Board has decided to follow the ISSB standards in their requirements. But we've seen this momentum around the globe as well, so in other countries as well.
So, Mike, you're with Food and Beverage Manitoba. Do you see this as opportunity, or is this a constraint and a barrier for your members?
Yeah, so actually one of the things that we've been trying to do over the last 2 years is to increasingly frame this as an opportunity. I think people still do see this as something that is going to be a cost imposed upon them, and I think that is actually a really dangerous way to sort of approach this. I just was reading this morning on the news, they're releasing another report talking about climate risk. And I think the reality is, business people are used to managing risk, whether you're a farmer, a processor, wherever you are in that ecosystem, you're used to managing risk. And I think the fundamental issue right now is that we are not actually getting the signals we need to those companies to manage these kinds of risks. So if you think about, droughts, storms, fires, whatever, supply chain risks. I think about a lot of our members who have had to deal with supply chain disruptions. I mean, what we've dealt with now is nothing compared to what it will be if we start to go over some of these tipping points that scientists are warning about. So that kind of risk, we need to be able to manage. And the only way to do that is to have those right kinds of signals being sent to us from the standards that Isabelle is talking about, from those kinds of pieces. Because right now, the market is just not valuing it. So, we've had this election in the United States that's happened. We have another one that's coming in Canada. I get often, members are saying, hey, things are going to change. And I think, again, that is a really dangerous way to look at it, because the underlying risks associated with climate change, biodiversity loss, all these, they're not going away. They're only accelerating. So the longer we wait to incorporate those signals, the harder it will be for us to manage those risks.
So, okay, go ahead, Isabelle. Go ahead.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I think Michael is absolutely right. We often get the question of the impact of the different political challenges and the changes, and obviously when we have governments that are more inclined or wanting to work on different elements of climate change or sustainability, it helps. But the fact is that the climate change and the impacts are going to be felt no matter what government is in place. So it's really important to address these issues, and this is why we try to have these neutral standards that are above the political spectrum or debates. So I think that's a really important one. Like no matter what happens in the election cycles, the impacts is still going to be felt. And maybe another thing that I'm going to jump on is on the opportunities. We always talk about the risks, and companies always see the burden of providing these reporting and thinking about their strategies in terms of sustainability. But really, when the economy changes and we need to change certain things of our economy, it also brings up opportunities. And when people actually evaluate those risks, they should also look at the opportunity side. It can be, there's a momentum right now to position certain companies or certain industries across the globe. And I think this is something we should also focus on that could be more. positive than just always thinking about the risks and the challenges.
Yeah. So Tara, how is the National Agri-Food Performance Index defining what counts as credible evidence when we're measuring sustainability within the agri-food system?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. I want to also jump on what Isabelle and Mike just said, because I think there is a great opportunity here to tell Canada's story for the agri-food sector and to really lean into our competitiveness. We should be proud of where we're at right now. We're trying to communicate that better. And the index, with its framework of 20 indicators and 130 plus metrics and a growing coalition, is really leaning into how to communicate that. The job of the coalition, so we now have 151 partners and growing. I think we're going to be at 160 here over the next few weeks. They represent the entire sector. So we're looking at producer organizations, crops, animal agriculture, aquaculture, food processing and manufacturing, transportation, banks, input services, academia, governments at all levels. It's a fantastic set of private-public partnerships that are working on, that already developed this framework of 20 indicators across 4 blocks of sustainability. So that's environment, finance, because we have to be financially sustainable as well. Our social factors like food security, labor market attractiveness, what skills we have. And then the food integrity piece is around food safety and getting into that traceability piece, which is going to speak to sustainable sourcing. So I'm really proud of the work that the coalition has done to facilitate and identify these 20 indicators that now allow us to have conversations and gather data from across the sector to really prove that we are sustainable. And what do we mean by that in terms of our metrics and our methodologies? So that's the job of the coalition right there, is to decide what counts as evidence, what gets prioritized, and then we can come together on our common issues and really raise visibility for those.
So you got 151 diverse partners. How does the index accommodate the diversity across that group? Because I can only imagine, there's everyone's not on the exact same line when it comes to what should be measured or how, or what, the returns or the opportunity. So how do you manage all that diversity?
Yeah. And so it's good to disagree on stuff, right? There's nothing wrong with disagreement. And we are figuring out year to year, in terms of our process of continuing improvement, how much data to include and what level of granularity. This is not about identifying any particular practices of a farm or a province. This is about actually benchmarking amongst ourselves in terms of what are some really good practices for understanding soil health, for example, and what do we have available? What data gaps are there, and what do we want to prioritize in terms of our work plan to fill in those data gaps? And of course, part of that is responding to market conditions and making sure that we lean into our competitiveness and we respond to these demands.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tara. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Nope.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say to Isabelle, what does compliance look like? Right? Like, because there's the one side of it where, okay, I get this at 100,000 feet. I've also heard from Mike that this is an opportunity. He's got members saying that. Okay, that I hear you. What does the compliance side look like?
So I think the goal is really to start somewhere. Sustainability reporting is not new in the sense that we've had these ESG reports around for so long, but now having these standards in place, and what we're trying to achieve is to get this adopted by regulators across the globe so that there is an element of accountability and compliance. So Tara mentioned something about addressing priorities, and we've discussed about this continuum as well at the beginning of this webcast. And I think it's really important to know that everyone is looking for this data at the moment, and everyone is focusing on where they're going to get the data for the reporting, but there's a larger framework, and you need to start by identifying those risks, there's opportunities, the governance structure, and the strategies. And I think once we get that done, then the data is going to come eventually. Everyone is working on this continuum and this spectrum, and we need to start somewhere. I think we need to start with what we have even in our standards, we have this transition reliefs so that you don't need to comply with everything in the first year. It's really a continuum, so it's a work in progress for everybody. But I think the message that we try to share is that you need to start somewhere, and those opportunities are there now. So the earlier you get on board, the more chances you might have to get some of those opportunities or benefit from those opportunities that arise.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's, one of the things that we've done with our members, because we deal with a lot of SMEs who really don't have the capacity around this,
Yeah,
is
this
we
is one of my
say
questions. Yeah.
yeah, we say start small. So we're working on a toolkit with a company called Theory Mesh. They're a member of the coalition as well. And the idea behind it is, okay, you know how much energy you use. You look at things like food waste. That's probably one of the easiest ones to really sort of have this kind of knock-on effect. Can you identify what your waste streams are? Water usage, things that are going to immediately drive economic benefits within your organization and create a culture that is compatible with this. And we try to compare it as much as possible to food safety in that sort of same way. You have these kind of SOPs related to your food safety. Well, you should, but there's also a food safety culture element to it, right? Like you want people on your team to know why this matters and to drive that from the ground up and from the top down simultaneously. And the same goes for sustainability. And it's just about picking those couple of points early on that are going to drive something. So for some of our companies, it is about finding, a way to use their potato peelings in some kind of way, or to connect with a local farmer so that they can compost rather than go to there, or to, there's so many different ways about that. But keep it simple initially, build that momentum, get some of those metrics. And for a lot of people right now, a lot of the kind of regulators right now, the people who are asking them the questions, the suppliers often, they just want to see your plan. They want to see what you're doing. What are those things that you're tackling? That's enough now. It won't be eventually, but for now, that's going to build that momentum.
Well, I was
And
just
I
going to
think,
ask oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, at least I think it's important for SMEs to start somewhere, as you said. And I think we're also all we all know that the requirements that are going to be made for the multinationals of this world are not going to be the same at the same level of for SMEs. We hear this concern a lot about SMEs and how are they going to react, or what is going to be the impact for them who might not have the same resources or a full team of sustainability experts like multinationals have. And I think the goal is never to drown SMEs in requirements and reporting requirements. It's really for them to find these strategies and find these wins, these small wins, and start from somewhere and move ahead.
I can see for large or small companies that score well, right? You benchmark and you're like, wow, like awesome. There's a marketing opportunity there or a storytelling opportunity. What about ones that don't? Are we headed towards is the market that punishes them? Like, or are there other is there going to be some sort of form of a deterrent for maybe non-compliance or lack of success when you benchmark yourself against others in the industry? Let's take that one.
I mean, I could start. I think for us, one of the advantages maybe of being compliant with the standards or with some type of sustainability reporting is really with the investors for your companies. And we see that more and more is that the lending conditions or even the decision to invest or not in a company, they will come with requirements. They have their own requirements. They want to know how that company is positioned in terms of sustainability. So it will come from investors, definitely. And they're the strongest supporters of our standards. They're the reason behind what we're asking for this. And yeah, I think it's going to come from the investors, but it could eventually come from any call for projects. You will see those elements. You will need to be compliant. You will need to show that you have some type of sustainability or climate change strategy. So it's going to come, I think, more and more. And this is what we're trying to do, to harmonize these different requirements so that instead of having different questions or different questionnaires for every aspect of the economy, then you have centralized criteria and frameworks.
Well, I can see for Mike's members. I was just sorry, Mike. For some of your members, I can really see it from the standpoint of I am producing pickles. And I am looking to be able to sell them into a mainline grocery chain. Having this data is super critical to get on the shelf of retailers like that. That's where I can really see this connection. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, no, and it's already happening. Like last year at our Cultivate conference, one of the keynote speakers was Sobeys. They were talking about their net zero. They were talking about compliance. They were talking about the questions they were already asking of their supply chain for this, right? And they said that that's only going to get escalated. So it is coming from those investors. It's coming from the retailers. And I think your question about whether this will punish. I mean, I actually think we need to talk about that more in some ways, but with the caveat that like right now, climate change and what's going on with biodiversity loss, all this is one of the biggest market failures ever. Like it is, and whatever your opinion is, there has to be a reckoning one way or another. Either we, collapse or we reckon with this. And the longer time horizon we have to kind of make those adjustments, the easier it's going to be for industries to make those changes. But the reality is, it is going to be challenging, and we are entering challenging times. So if you look at, say, what's happened with the energy transition, it's accelerated incredibly over the last 10 years. Solar panels have come down in like 95%, right? So right now, in most jurisdictions around the world, green energy is the cheapest energy. But that's not stopping people like right now with election at the border. Trump is talking about cutting wind projects. Has nothing to do with the economics of it. He basically just says, oh, well, we want to support oil and gas. And so what we have to sort of see is like, right now we're seeing economic forces kind of reacting and saying, yeah, these technologies are now mature. These technologies are going in there. So we have to find ways that politically we can kind of depolarize some of these things, embrace those things that are working. And that's to Tara's point. Let's tell that good story about agriculture in Canada, because I think there's a lot of good things, and then work on some of those transitions around certain subsectors that will have a hard time, that are the equivalent of oil and gas in this, that will need that transition, that will need those supports to be able to deal with that, because over the long term they will be, the market will punish them.
But the Canadian oil and gas sector has done a lot of work when it comes to telling a story around some of the sustainable things they're doing, and because there has been a branding, used against them when it comes to, clean versus dirty and, sort of topics like that. So even that industry's done a lot of work in something kind of similar to what we're talking about here, have they not? I think.
I mean, it's going to be hard to see. I mean, right now we have legislation around anti-greenwashing. I doubt
Yeah.
any of those claims will pass that sniff test, right? Like it will be very difficult into there, especially with some of the carbon sequestration, goals around bringing, those are going to be very challenging. There has very few projects globally have shown that can be scaled at a way that's sort of comparable to the impact. So we'll see, but I think it is. I think there's a lot of anxiety around what that legislation will do. And I think this is even more of a reason we need an index, because we need to have that data to be able to back up claims for the purpose of, I would say, investment in these things. We are going to need to invest in the infrastructure, in the technologies, in the R&D, in all of it that is going to accelerate this, right? And the only way to do that sort of effectively in a resource constrained environment is to have good data about what are the things that that we need to be doubling down on what are some things that are just never going to transition.
Yeah, the anti-greenwashing legislation, I've interviewed a number of different lawyers on that and talked to different groups, very concerned and sort of, concerned that it actually works against us in the sense that people are going to focus less on being able to make claims because they don't want to have to go through the legal costs of actually having to prove it in the first place. It's a complex issue.
Yeah, it is complex.
And can I add something to this?
Right.
So, because the comparison with oil and gas. So I sit in Alberta, and I'm surrounded by, I've seen a lot of people lose their jobs in that sector. I want to say that agri-food is going to be different. It is different. We have nutrient recycling. What Mike was just referring to in terms of eliminating food waste, recycling nutrients across the food chain. We're seeing that that happen. The ecosystem services that producers can add, all the positive benefits that sometimes go unrecognized and unnoticed. I think we're really moving into a more circular economy. We want to do more with less, and it's possible there is benefits from this. Difference with oil and gas, again, is it's a finite resource, but we need to continue to produce food and produce more of it.
Yeah. Tara, I want to ask you, in day 2 of the conference, there was a lot of talk about sustainability being a leadership challenge. And I've never kind of really heard it put in that context. What does that mean?
Yeah, it was interesting. And we are doing something quite innovative, right, with this coalition. It's a grassroots movement. It started with 12 organizations. We're now at 151 and still growing. Part of the discussion too was that in the 21st century, we need different tools for getting things done. And we're aware that our silos are really preventing us sometimes from finding solutions and kind of resolving some of these issues. We get frustrated, we recognize some issues, sometimes they're niche problems that we're responding to or we're not being proactive with. So in this day and age, the idea was that leadership is also about enabling this collaboration and listening across the sector and not being too quick to judge or to find short-term solutions. But I think we're trying to set up an initiative here that will lead to long-term solutions.
Isabelle, from a data standpoint, how much of this is like individual entity data sourcing versus aggregation of results over like an industry vertical? There's also a whole bunch of new technologies when it comes to gathering some of this data, which allows us probably to do it faster and be able to compute it and get the outcomes and understanding much faster than the human brain doing it. What's all happening in the data collection area?
Yeah, I think this is a question that everyone is asking themselves, and I think there are different initiatives that will arise from this. We see with the index is one, but in different sectors there might be, and especially to help the SMEs, because those larger companies will rely on data providers that are offering those servicing or aggregating this data at the moment. The more people report, the more data we'll get, and this will help feed into the availability of data in the different sectors. But also something that might help people is that for some issues, we might also rely on estimates. Like we know how to calculate these emissions from different sectors or from different entities. So as we start, there might be a lot of reliability on estimates and on making sure that there's a close assumption of what the impact is. And as we go, I think as we move forward on this journey of sustainability reporting, then the data is going to get clearer and clearer and more precise. So, yeah.
So if I think about knowing the numbers from just a financial standpoint, like the more you know your numbers, the better decisions you can make about where you go forward.
Yeah.
I have to think that there is a tie between having measurement, indexing, benchmarking, and knowing where we sit, whether that's a good story or an area of improvement. It drives innovation in the sustainability sector too. I don't know, Mike, do you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you can do it without it, right? Like, business people are great at optimizing things, right? So different processes, flows, creating value. If you do not know what your impact is and the market is not pricing it in, and you are not paying for it, you're dumping CO2 into the atmosphere and there's no cost to it, you will do the rational thing, which is not pay for it, right? Unless you see an opportunity to be able to leverage that story for whatever reason, right? So Maple Leaf being the first largest food company to go carbon neutral. This was them sort of leaping in on opportunity, early on, to be able to do that. And you're seeing more and more of these large companies. And I think they're doing it from the perspective of they see the long term. These are companies that are used to planning in 10, 20-year cycles, right? And thinking about large investments. So they see that this is not going away anywhere and that there is a first mover advantage, to be able to sort of capture that market. But again, without that information, without those clear signals saying, this is how I compare to someone else, right? This is how my food waste compares to someone else, my water usage, whatever, all of these things. And especially when it comes to, on my end, I deal mostly with food processors. They need to be able to make those assessments about their ingredients and about the inputs that are coming in. So they need to be able to go out and say, am I picking between an oat milk versus an almond milk? What are the implications of that in terms of water usage, carbon intensity? If I'm picking chicken versus beef, what is the implication of, like, they need to be able to have that information. So when they're doing a formulation, they can then say, well, okay, if this product right now I created has, an impact on the environment that is X versus this product. If you don't have that data, how can you possibly make that decision? And that needs to flow back into just normal business planning processes.
So so at the processor level or food manufacturer level, that all resonates. I understand exactly what you're saying. There's some of our audience here that is in primary agriculture. Maybe they're a corn and bean farmer, cattle farmer, the fruit and veg. How does all of this impact them? What are the implications, and what does this look like for a farm? Because the grain buyer shows up, he's not asking for their carbon intensity score, at least now. But what does this mean for the primary farm level?
I think there are producers thinking this way already. I mean, I really like the example that Mike used around water usage and carbon intensity and how you choose your inputs or your primary ag. So in the dairy sector, for example, they're actually very data mature. They have good support for softwares. I know that there's dairy producers who have been nimble in terms of changing how they manage their business in response to market conditions, whether it be number of liters that they produce versus the fat content in that milk. And they make decisions around culling their herd and things in function of that. So it's just when you have data and you're able to see year on year how you're performing and what has changed and strategically kind of maneuver with that data. That's the only difference here. It's learning from what you've done in the past, responding to different opportunities in the market, whether it's consumer needs, market access, etc. And then you do your business and you're more productive at the end of the day.
I think that's really important. When we talk about sustainability reporting, people sometimes think that they have to be perfect, or if they're not perfect, it's not good. But it's really about assessing the risks and the opportunities for your business. No one is perfect. No one's going to be perfect, but you need to show that you're handling or managing those opportunities or those risks, and that you have a strategy. This is really what it's about. It will evolve over the next couple of years. It's not about people are afraid that if they don't have this perfect score or everything is perfect in their business, but that's really not what it's about. It's about being just knowing and having the knowledge of what needs to be, what can be addressed, what should be prioritized.
Don't let perfection be the enemy of
exactly.
Progress. Is that worse? Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Good. Well, I think that's a great way to finish up here. I really appreciate everybody's participation here in the Ag Policy Connection podcast. Really appreciate it. Tara, thanks so much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Isabelle, it was great to meet you, and thank you.
Thank you.
And Mike, keep up the great work. Great insights. Thank you. Please stay tuned for more episodes of the Ag Policy Connection podcast. We've got a new season coming shortly. Thank you. On behalf of Real Agriculture and Cappy, I'm Shaun Haney, and we'll talk to you again soon.